On the morning of February 17, 1600, a crowd gathered in a Roman square to watch a man die. His name was Giordano Bruno. Before the flames were lit, guards forced a metal spike through his tongue and clamped his jaw shut. He had one final chance to speak, to recant, to save himself. He said nothing. Or rather, he was made to say nothing. The silence itself became his last statement. Why would a man choose fire over a single word of surrender? To understand that morning in Campo de Fiori, we need to go back more than 30 years, to a boy from a small town near Naples who could not stop asking questions. Filippo Bruno was born in 1548 in Nola, a market town in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. His father was a soldier, and the family had little money. But the boy had something rarer than wealth, a memory that seemed almost supernatural. He could absorb long passages of text after reading them once. At 17, this gift caught the attention of the Dominican order, and Bruno entered a monastery in Naples. He took a new name in honor of his teacher, Giordano. The church expected him to become a loyal, disciplined friar. Instead, it had recruited a mind that refused to accept limits. Inside the monastery library, Bruno found more than religious texts. He found the works of ancient philosophers, forbidden authors, and a Polish astronomer named Nicolaus Copernicus, who had argued decades earlier that the Earth moved around the Sun, not the other way around. Most scholars still treated this idea as dangerous speculation. Bruno did not just accept it. He pushed it further than anyone had dared. If the Earth was not the center of everything, he reasoned, then perhaps the universe had no center at all. Perhaps it was infinite, filled with countless suns and countless worlds, some of them possibly home to other forms of life. This was not simply astronomy. In the late 16th century, cosmology and theology were tightly bound together. To question the structure of the heavens was to question the structure of Christian belief itself. Bruno's superiors noticed his growing collection of unauthorized books and his habit of arguing openly about doctrine. In 1576, formal charges of heresy were prepared against him in Naples. Rather than face trial, Bruno fled the monastery, discarded his friar's robes, and began a life of near-constant movement across Europe. For the next 16 years, Bruno lived as a wanderer. He passed through Geneva, then a stronghold of Protestant Calvinism, where he hoped to find more freedom of thought. He found the opposite. His public criticism of a local professor led to his arrest and excommunication by the Calvinist Church as well. Bruno discovered something painful and important: no single religious authority of his time, Catholic or Protestant, welcomed the scale of his ideas. He moved on to Toulouse, then Paris, where his extraordinary memory finally opened a door. Bruno had developed a system for organizing memory using symbolic images, a technique with ancient roots. He taught this method to French nobility and reportedly impressed King Henry III himself, who granted him a teaching position despite Bruno's refusal to attend Catholic Mass. For a brief period, genius bought him protection. Around 1583, Bruno crossed to England, carrying letters of introduction to the French ambassador in London. It was here, in the relatively open intellectual climate of Elizabethan England, that Bruno produced his most important work. In dense, sometimes combative Italian dialogues, he laid out his vision of an infinite universe filled with an infinite number of worlds. He argued that God's creative power could not logically be limited to one small planet at the center of a small, enclosed cosmos. A truly infinite God, he insisted, would create an infinite universe. Bruno also attempted to lecture at Oxford University, presenting Copernican ideas to skeptical academics. The encounter went badly. English scholars mocked his intensity and his provincial Italian style. Bruno, in turn, wrote scathingly about their conservatism. He was a man who made enemies almost as quickly as he made ideas, and this pattern would eventually cost him everything. By the early 1590s, Bruno's restless search for patronage and safety had taken him through Germany, where several universities also grew wary of his unconventional teachings. Homesick, financially strained, and perhaps overconfident in his own reputation, Bruno made a decision that would prove fatal. In 1591, a wealthy Venetian nobleman named Giovanni Mocenigo invited him back to Italy, promising to sponsor his work and learn his memory techniques. Venice had a reputation for greater tolerance than Rome. Bruno accepted. It was a catastrophic misjudgment. Mocenigo, it turned out, wanted more from Bruno than lessons in memory. He wanted secret knowledge, perhaps techniques he believed bordered on magic. When Bruno grew distant and prepared to leave Venice, Mocenigo grew angry and suspicious. In May 1592, he denounced Bruno to the Venetian Inquisition, accusing him of blasphemy and heretical beliefs about the nature of the cosmos, the soul, and Christ himself. If you find yourself drawn into how one accusation from a disappointed patron could unravel a man's entire life, you are already sensing why this story has held historians' attention for 4 centuries. Venice's Inquisition was, by the standards of the era, relatively measured. Bruno defended himself with some success, and there was a real possibility he might have received a lighter sentence, perhaps even release. But Rome intervened. The Roman Inquisition, operating under direct papal authority, demanded that Bruno be extradited to face trial in the capital. In January 1593, he was transferred to the Castel Sant'Angelo prison in Rome. What followed was one of the longest heresy trials in the history of the Roman Inquisition, nearly 8 years of imprisonment, interrogation, and negotiation. Court records that survive today, though incomplete, reveal a process built around pressure and patience rather than swift punishment. Inquisitors listed specific propositions drawn from Bruno's writings and demanded that he recant each one individually. At various points, Bruno appeared willing to compromise. He reportedly agreed to abandon certain philosophical claims that conflicted with church doctrine. But some ideas he would not surrender. Historians still debate exactly which propositions Bruno refused to renounce, since much of the original trial documentation was lost or destroyed over the centuries. What survives suggests his resistance centered on his views of an infinite universe, the plurality of worlds, and elements of his broader philosophical and religious framework that diverged sharply from Catholic teaching. Whether this resistance came from unshakable intellectual conviction, wounded pride, or some combination of both remains, honestly, unknowable. Bruno left no private journal explaining his inner reasoning during those final prison years. In January 1600, after nearly a decade of proceedings, Pope Clement VIII personally reviewed the case and ordered that Bruno be declared an unrepentant heretic. On February 8, he was brought before the Inquisition to hear his sentence read aloud. According to an account recorded by an inquisitor present that day, Bruno responded to the judges with a defiant remark, suggesting that they feared pronouncing his sentence more than he feared receiving it. Historians treat this quotation with some caution, since it comes from a single second-hand source, but it has become one of the most repeated lines associated with his final days. 9 days later, on February 17, Bruno was led to Campo de' Fiori, a public market square in the heart of Rome. He was stripped, tied to a wooden stake, and his tongue was restrained to prevent any final speech that might be interpreted as heretical preaching to the crowd. This detail comes from multiple contemporary accounts and underscores something important. Church authorities feared not just his beliefs, but his voice itself, his known ability to argue persuasively and hold an audience. Silencing him physically was, in a sense, an admission of how dangerous his words had proven to be. He was burned alive. He was 52 years old. For centuries afterward, Bruno's story existed mostly at the margins of history, remembered by a small circle of philosophers and scientists. That began to change in the 19th century, as Europe re-examined the relationship between science and religious authority. In 1889, admirers funded a bronze statue of Bruno on the very spot where he died in Campo de Fiori. The unveiling triggered public protests from the Catholic Church, which still considered Bruno a heretic rather than a martyr for science. The statue remains there today, Bruno's hooded figure gazing outward over the square, a permanent, uncomfortable reminder standing in a city that tried to erase him. It would be simple, and satisfying, to call Bruno purely a martyr for science, a man who died solely for believing the Earth orbits the Sun. The full historical record resists that simple version. Bruno was executed for a combination of theological positions, not for astronomy alone. His case involved claims about Christ's divinity, the nature of the soul, and rejection of specific Catholic doctrines, mixed together with his cosmological ideas. Reducing his death to a single clean narrative about heliocentrism, as later generations sometimes did, oversimplifies a genuinely complicated trial. And yet something essential remains true beneath that complexity. Bruno's insistence on an infinite, unbounded universe was not a peripheral detail in his case. It ran through his most controversial writings and his refusal to fully submit. In some meaningful sense, a man really did stand at the edge of what his era considered thinkable, and he refused to step back, even when stepping back would have kept him alive. If a moment like that stays with you, one person weighing years of freedom against a single unspoken idea, this kind of history rewards a closer look, and there is more of it waiting whenever you want to keep exploring. Modern science has, in a strange way, moved far closer to Bruno's vision than to the closed universe his judges defended. Astronomers have now confirmed thousands of planets orbiting other stars. The observable universe stretches across billions of light-years, filled with more galaxies than anyone in 1600 could have imagined. Bruno had no telescope, no data, no observational proof. His infinite universe was philosophical intuition, not measured science, and it is important not to overstate his role as some kind of accidental physicist. He was a mystic and philosopher first, reaching conclusions through reasoning about God's infinite nature rather than through evidence. But intuition, in his case, brushed against something the universe later confirmed to be closer to true than false. That is the strange, unfinished quality of Bruno's story. He was wrong about some things and startlingly ahead of his time about others, and the flames in Campo de Fiori could not sort out which was which. History rarely offers that kind of clean judgment. What remains, for centuries later, is the image of a man forced into silence at the very last moment of his life, and the quieter fact that his ideas kept speaking long after his voice was gone. The book survived, scattered across libraries in England, Germany, and Italy, waiting to be read by people who never met him. The church that condemned him eventually operated within a universe it no longer fully controlled, one measured in light-years rather than in closed spheres. Bruno did not choose the fire because he wanted to die. Every surviving record suggests a man who tried, more than once, to find some path back to safety. But somewhere in those 8 years of imprisonment, faced with the specific demand to renounce his understanding of an unbounded cosmos, he reached a point he would not cross. We cannot know his private thoughts in that final cell. We can only know what he refused to say, and what that refusal cost him. Some historical questions never fully close. This may be one of them. Not whether Bruno died, or how, but why silence felt to him like a smaller loss than surrender. 400 years later, standing in that same Roman square, his bronze figure still faces outward, still saying nothing, and somehow still impossible to ignore.